Hello, I'm Carolyn Ramsey with the Pleasantville Garden Club, and I'm delighted to be here today to share one of our wonderful guests. The Pleasantville Garden Club has 6 fantastic programs every year, and this April we were fortunate enough to have Doug DeCandia visit us to talk to us about different growing methods and some of his experiences here on Earth. I'd like to say thank you so much for being with us, Doug.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Can you tell us, when you came to visit our club, you talked a lot about growing food. How did you get interested in growing food?
I didn't grow up a farmer. I grew up in northern Westchester County. But I grew up on a dirt road and surrounded by forest and woods. And so I grew up exploring those woods and being very close and kin to nature and the outdoors, and that was really powerful and formative for me. I also grew up as part of my father's family is from southern Italy, and so I grew up with my grandmother is an amazing cook, amazing chef, and so she kind of brought me up into this world of really joined family and food and love and all of these things. And so from a very young age, I grew up with this kind of affinity and knowledge and embodied knowledge of health, of food, and then also of the outdoors. And so I, growing up and going through school, and I had a hard time in grade school and high school just with the type of learning that I was kind of forced into, in the conventional education system. But when I got to I went to college in Vermont, and when I was in Vermont, I was able to live in a community of students, cooperative housing kind of thing, and we cooked for ourselves. We had communal meals every night. We cooked for the community, 20 to 50 people a night, and so that kind of remembered my connection with my family, my grandmother, and just this power of being together, living together, sharing meals together. And it was so powerful for me that I knew it was something that I in some way needed to continue in my life. And I knew that I needed to be active. I knew that I needed to be doing something with my day if this was my work. And so I started to kind of, gardening when I was living in that community. And it just was really powerful because it was kind of bridging all of these things that I had grown so knowing that I needed in my life. And the physicality of gardening and agriculture and farming has been kind of really powerful for me. I grew up an athlete as well, and so when it came to a time where I knew I didn't need to be continuing team sports, I needed something to fill that space, and the way that agriculture for me and the way that I practice agriculture is in a lot of ways kind of like a form of just kind of exercise, but movement, and really just engaging the body with the work. And so I came into agriculture through different means, but it was all kind of willed through me. It was like my ancestors were guiding me into it in some ways.
It's funny you say that. I like your description. I've never been somebody who wanted to go spend 30 minutes or an hour at the gym doing a repetitive exercise. But I remember very well the first time I found a horse farm north of Westchester where I could go get composted manure. And my friend and I took a truck and got 50 or 60 bushels of manure, and we dug it all day, and then we brought it back and we put it into the garden, and very physically difficult, but incredibly satisfying. It sounds like you get a great deal of satisfaction from your work.
Yeah, and that satisfaction is really, it's amazing. The endorphins that you get from exercise, is definitely something that you can get from farming for sure. You get that same kind of experience. But there's something added to it when I think you're working with the land and you're working with nature. You know, it almost feels like that giving of yourself, that exhaustion that you feel is like received from the land and then like is given back to you. And so it's this, I feel that when I'm moving and working with the land, that there is this story that's being told, you know, or this breath that is happening and this movement that is happening together with the person and the land. And I just feel when I'm doing it, like there's I'm growing and I'm being fed in the movement and the act of gardening, as well as by, you know, the food that I'm eating and sharing afterwards. There's just, yeah, something very reciprocal in the act of growing.
Talking about growing, when I think of the books I read as a child that describe the life of a farmer, I often think of, you know, you rise at 4:30 or 5, you start with the first light of the day. It's very hard physical work. Is current growing of food in this area, does it look like that, or is the picture different?
In this area, it looks different just because, you know, we're in Westchester County and there's not a lot of farms, and I think that those that are farming are probably living in similar life ways than it has been done for the last few hundred years. But for me, I'm constantly trying to question myself and also listen to myself about the way of agriculture that I feel most comfortable doing. I think waking up and, you know, working with the day, working with the seasons is one of the most precious and important parts of agriculture. Is that, you know, as a farmer, as a grower, you are very intimate with the seasons and the days, and, you know, every single difference that happens every single day, you know, and being able to move and be fluid with how nature presents itself every day. That's where I feel most whole. But there's certain things that I want to be like challenging in some ways too about the type of agriculture that I think has been popularized in America for the last few hundred years. The type of agriculture that I think is being practiced is an import from Europe. You know, with colonization came the agricultural ways of Europe. And that was transplanted onto an indigenous way of growing food on this continent that had been employed for many, many, many centuries. And so it is that type of agriculture that, you know, the indigenous agriculture, you know, you can call it agroforestry or permaculture, like these names that are being given to it today, that I feel very akin to, and that I'm trying to remember, because I know that my ancestors from Italy and France and Scotland like practice indigenous agriculture where they came from for many, many years. And it is that kind of way that, you know, the forest is as important as the field, you know, and there's all of these different dynamics. It's not just a flat field with vegetable row crops growing and then tractors or horses or something, you know. That never felt right to me, because I've been in places like that, I've worked in places like that, you know, where it's straight lines, and, you know, it's hot and it's dry, and, like, you know, you need to water the crops because they dry out from the sun and exposure to the wind and everything, because there's nothing to block and shade that. And so I personally am physically more comfortable in a more dynamic forested space, or, like, you know, where there are trees or bushes, or somewhere where I could at least like get out of the sun for a little bit and not be stuck in the hot sun at midday, you know. And so it's like I'm trying to listen to my body more, and trying to listen to my heart and my mind, and, like, just where I feel most comfortable that's the space that I want to try and create. And so the agricultural, like the gardens and the spaces that I feel most like whole in and resonant to are ones that are maybe a little bit different than like the traditional farms that we might picture. Traditional American farm.
It's interesting you say that. I visited a friend's home garden about 6 years ago, and I noticed that she had planted very tall zinnias and a number of other flowers interspersed amongst her vegetables. And I thought, wow, it looks beautiful and it feels good to be here. And since then I've learned a lot more about pollinators and the importance they play in our food supply and in our environment. Is having food, if you will, available for pollinators part of your vision of the kind of growing experience you want to have and create?
Yeah, I think one of the ideas that I was always kind of hesitant about was the idea of plants being competitive against each other, and so that plants are trying to they'll take nutrients from other plants, and so this question, this whole thing about weeds and having what is the place for weeds, and is there a place for weeds among cultivated crops, and so I think it all lends to an idea of cooperation rather than competition, and I think all plants are turning sunlight into soil. They take sunlight, and carbon dioxide and create oxygen and glucose, and a lot of that glucose and sugar and carbon goes out into the soil and actually helps other plants to grow. So plants need other plants to grow. And so growing plants that are for human consumption and growing plants that are directly for supporting pollinators, I think you can have it all. You can do it all at once. And it's an intricate thing, and it's a dance. It's not as easy to manage, and I think that's why a lot of big farms stay on the monoculture kind of way, or at least a row is a row of something, not a mix of something, because it's much easier to cultivate and to manage it when it's one thing. And I get that, and I think, but the dynamics that creates on a farm, you feel it when you go to a garden. There's a different energy when you go to a very diverse feeling garden and into a very, a space that just has a lot of things going on, but that is carefully, coordinated and managed in such a way. It feels different than going to a farm where it's all kind of row crops and it's just one certain thing. I feel it when I go. And so I do think that there's a cooperative model that can be explored, that I'm trying to explore more, of how to grow plants, multifunctional plants that can support each other while they're growing and not actually compete but cooperate.
It's a very interesting topic. There were a couple of things you shared with us when you came to see our club that I'm sure our audiences would be interested in. And one of them I recall was talking about covering the soil. And many of us have heard we shouldn't leave bare soil, but you talked about how Mother Nature covers the soil with weeds and what roles weeds may play in helping us. Would you talk a little bit about that for this audience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is something that I am very passionate about. And when people ask, what is it? What can I do for my garden? How can I build soil health and do these things? And the first thing, and sometimes the easiest thing, is just to cover the soil. And I say that it's something easy to be done that is going to make it easier for the plants to grow better in the future. And I say that because I picture and I look at Mother Nature I try and follow what's happening, what nature is doing in the forests, in the fields, in the meadows, and I try and kind of translate that into a way that I can apply those principles to the garden. And nowhere in nature, in a natural ecosystem, will you ever see soil, except when there's a disturbance. So in the forest, there's no big open spaces of bare soil. In the meadows, wherever there's bare soil, there has either been some kind of disturbance, human or natural, that is soon going to be covered up. And in the garden, in agriculture in general, is a disturbance to the soil. We've taken this ecosystem, be it a grassland, be it a forest, cleared the trees away, and then dug up the soil and turned the soil so that we can plant seeds and food. And not that that's a bad thing, because, I mean, agriculture has arisen in the last 10,000 years for a certain reason, to feed rising populations of people, you know, and so we have to do that in a way. We have to grow food. We have to disturb the soil in order to grow food sometimes. But if we are going to do that, we should do it in the most minimum way of disturbance, and then so that it creates conditions for plants to grow healthfully and grow well. With that principle in mind, I do kind of see that bare soil is a wound, is an open wound in the earth. And just as our bodies, as our bodies repair a cut, and it become a scab, you know, our bodies can regenerate and heal. And the earth is a body, and Mother Earth will heal herself. And so when there's a cut made into the earth, be it through tillage or some kind of other disturbance, that Mother Nature is going to heal that wound. And rather than a scab, what it looks like on our skin, you know, plants are kind of a healing of that wound. And gardeners, farmers will often call those plants weeds. They are Mother Nature's kind of Band-Aid or healing in a way. And so where there's bare soil, what's going to heal that are the roots, are the plants to regather sunlight and turn that wound into something that is healthy again. And so if we don't want weeds, we should not create the conditions that there needs to be weeds in the garden. And so, I mean, if we don't want these wild plants growing in our garden, we should not keep the soil bare, because a bare soil, Mother Earth sees that as a wound and is going to grow plants to heal that wound. And so by covering the soil with leaves or hay, makes it less necessary for the earth to grow weeds in order to cover the soil and heal that wound.
It's very interesting. It seems to me that if I'm a home gardener with a 10 by 10 plot, I can probably find some leaves or some wood chips and cover my soil reasonably easily. Mm-hmm. What do you do if you've got a 10-acre farm mm-hmm. and you need to plant it, but you also need to cover the soil? Do you have any experience in this kind of scenario?
Yeah, not a 10-acre farm. I've worked up to acre plots and 3 acres. But what I've done is I use plants, green mulches or living mulches, also called cover crops. So cover crops are plants that we plant to basically cover or feed the soil, and not necessarily for a harvesting of a crop from that in order to eat or to sell. But strictly for soil health and protection. So I sometimes plant, what I do, like for instance, at this time of year, I'm planting winter rye and winter peas around the tomatoes, around the squash, around the eggplant. So I'm sowing seeds, I'm mixing those seeds in. The plants are going to grow, the rye and the peas are going to grow about a few inches before the winter comes, but that low growth is like a lawn, and it's going to cover the soil through the winter, so there's not going to be bare soil through the winter.
Let me just ask, so if I'm a home gardener and I've got my 10 by 10 plot and it's all covered with mulched leaves and mm-hmm. they're slowly decomposing, should I pull those away and try cover crops? Does it make sense for a small home gardener, or is this a better technique for a larger space?
It works on a larger space because, like, if you're going to get 10 acres worth of leaves, that's going to take a long time. Yeah. So I think on a large scale, using cover crops is actually more efficient. On a small scale, I think cover crops are as needed as a large scale too, because what's happening through cover crops, the plants are growing, right? And so they're taking sunlight, they're making sugar, that C6H12O6, that glucose compound molecule. That carbon in that is going to be put into the soil, and it's going to help build soil carbon, which is basically soil organic matter, which is going to help to build and grow soil. So as plants grow, as cover crops grow, they're also feeding and building soil, which is different, so that a home gardener can do it in order to effectively and efficiently help to build their soil as well. But you could move back the leaves, or what I do is I'll just broadcast the seeds around the plants, and then I'll just turn it in with my hands. And so the leaves will get turned in too a little bit, but the seeds will fall into the holes, and then they'll start to grow up through the leaves.
That's very interesting. I'd like to try that. Now, one more thing about covering the soil. When I think of traditional mulching, one of the things I'm hoping to do is to manage water flow and water retention. I've never tried cover crops. Do I need to water if I'm growing cover crops? How does that work with the water management?
Yeah, no, you don't have to water any more than you would before or at all. These are grasses again, so winter rye is a grass, is a wheat. I mean, related to wheat as a cereal grain. They don't need a lot of water. I broadcast the seed and mix them in, and then, at this time of year, it's not as hot. There's more moisture, there's more time, there's, less evaporation that's happening, so there's more moisture held in the soil to germinate and support those seeds to grow. And so, no, I've never really watered cover crop seeds in. And once they start growing, they're actually covering the soil and then also holding water in their roots. So they retain water.
And something like winter rye, will the plant completely die before next spring's planting season starts for us? Or is it a perennial? How does that work?
So for me, there's two types of cover crops that I plant in the wintertime. There's one that I plant in August and September, which is either oats or field peas or something that's going to die in the winter. So I plant it early in August and September so that the plants have 3 months to grow tall. And so the oats will grow tall. And then when the winter comes, when that hard frost comes, those plants are going to die, but they're going to die and cover the soil. So it's going to look like you spread hay onto the soil, and that's going to stay over the soil through the winter. And then in the spring, you come and you just make a little hole in that residue, and you plant your seeds or you plant your plants in the early spring. So I'll plant that winter kill mix of seeds where I'm going to be planting early season spring crops.
Okay.
And then where I'm going to be planting later season, like summer or autumn crops like tomatoes or squash or acorn, the ones that like warm weather and you don't want to plant them before the last frost date, usually mid-May around here. I'm going to plant in those spaces. I'm going to plant winter rye, winter peas, and triticale, different mixes of plants that are going to grow a little bit in the fall and then over winter with that cover on the soil, and then in the spring they're going to keep growing. And then in mid-August, mid-May, I'm going to cut those plants. The grasses themselves are going to lay down on top of the soil like a cover. Their roots are going to decompose and become earth. And then in a week or two after planting, then I'll plant after cutting, I'll plant tomato seeds or tomato plants, squash plants, eggplants right into that residue.
Okay.
So it's a timing thing, and it probably sounded really confusing about how I just said it, but what I love about it is that it gets me into thinking way beyond just like this, there's one season and then there's the next season and then there's like this line in between and this start and end. Cover crops for me help to bridge like the winter and help to bridge kind of these seasons together. And so I start to feel that I'm part of a longer movement. I'm participating in something that is bridging the seasons and not just starting anew the next season, ending and then starting anew.
That's lovely. That's really neat. I realize we're coming to the end of our half hour pretty quickly. And there's one other topic that you shared with our club that I'd love to share with our viewers, which is, I think it was stone dust you talked about, and how important that is for creating a healthful and healthy soil. That was really new for me personally, because I think of organic matter decomposing, adding nutrients to the soil, but this is a whole nother area. Could you say a few words about that in our last couple minutes?
Yeah, sure. So when people came in and took the trees away, cut the trees down, exposed soil, the roots went away. And there was no way for the minerals and the organic matter and all of the stuff that was already there in the soil to be held. The roots held life, and that life held the soil together. But when we took that away, that life and the minerals in the soil didn't have anything to hold. And so a lot of life and minerals were lost after deforestation. And so
when you say they're lost, does that mean the rainwater carried them away? Where did they go?
yeah, so roots hold structure, you know,
Okay.
in addition to taking sunlight and sequestering or taking and putting carbon into the soil and exudates into the soil. There wasn't anything to hold the soil together. So just as like next to a riverbank, you know, if there's no soil, the water will slowly wash and erode that riverbank away and take down the minerals and take down the soil downstream. That happens in many different ways on flatland, on soil, through wind erosion, through water erosion. So if there's nothing there to hold that substance together, it's going to be washed away. And so over, you know, decades and centuries of soil being bare, a lot has been lost.
Okay.
And so remineralization is a practice of putting back what has been taken away, in a way. And doing that along with the organic materials. So in the soil, in natural soil, fungi and bacteria work away at rock, work away at the bedrock. You know, fungi attaches to stone, to rock, and then slowly decomposes and eats that stone away, and bringing that mineral to the tree roots or to the plant roots.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and then that fungi and the mycelium die, and so depositing a lot of that mineral into the soil. And so after centuries of this relationship between plants and fungi and rock, there has been an accumulation of minerals in the soil. And then when those minerals have been mined, essentially through leaching and through the loss of soil, but then also through extractive agriculture, where we're growing plants and we're taking those plants, the fruits of those plants, and we're exporting them somewhere else. We're essentially mining the soil of the minerals that were in those plants. And so we've been doing this for a long time, you know, and extracting from the soil. And so putting those minerals back into the soil in a way, along with the carbon materials of worm castings or compost or different things, it is part of a regeneration and restoration of the soil. There's a lot of complexity within using rock dust and stone dust, but because of how they're mined, where they come from, you know, so that's a really tricky situation, knowing that there's this need for minerals in the soil, but then how do they get there, and how do they get there without using extractive ways from, you know. And so one thing that I've been kind of introduced to and been practicing a little bit more is, you know, I'll go to a quarry somewhere that is nearby. They're mining the stone for something. When a quarry is mining stone, they create dust from the crushing of that stone, and that dust has to be captured before it goes into the atmosphere. And some quarries will hold that dust and then give that dust away or sell it. And that dust, that rock dust, be it from a granite mine or a basalt mine, is really powerful soil food. And so I'll go to somewhere where this is already happening, and not that I agree with mining practices, but right now there is this product that is being like a byproduct from the extraction of stone from the soil, and I will get that stone dust and I will spread that onto the garden along with compost or humates or some kind of carbon material to hold that rock dust into the soil for the plants to eat it.
That's wonderful. Well, that's something I'm definitely going to try in my garden in this next cycle.
Yeah.
Very excited about it.
Yeah.
I just can't thank you enough, Doug. It was wonderful to have you come to the club, and just a great experience to have the chance to talk with you one-on-one.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's so nice that you came to join us today for the Pleasantville Garden Club interview of Doug DeCandia. PCTV was so wonderful to host us, and we hope you enjoy the show.